That's great. And so one thing that just came to mind, I know it's a common question for people, is some of these medicines you mentioned are prescribed off-label for treatment of alcohol use disorder. Can any doctor prescribe off-label?
Absolutely. There's a misconception that somehow being off-label is bad, but that's the way physicians prescribe medications for, you know, hundreds of years here in America. Everything's off-label. The labels are sort of advertising that the FDA allows because a company has proven that the medication works for that purpose. But the medication it has effects on the body, and those effects can be useful for many diseases. Aspirin for heart attacks is off-label. Everybody uses aspirin for heart attacks, prevent so many deaths. But most of the common medicines that we think of are used off-label.
All right, welcome everybody. It's Katie Lane, and I'm here today with Dr. John Howe, who is an addiction medicine professional who has focused on treating alcohol addiction for 30 years or more now. And he also spent 20 years of his career doing research into treatment for alcoholism at the National Institute of Alcohol Abuse and Alcoholism. So I think a lot of people watching this, John, will know you, but I just wanted to thank you for being here and wonder if you could do a little bit of an introduction about yourself as well. About kind of your background with using medication treatment and nutrition for treating alcohol use disorder.
Well, thanks, Katie. It's great to be here. Alcoholism is really a fascinating problem for a scientific perspective, but it's a critical problem that I first noticed when I was a young doctor. I was working in an inner city clinic, and I would find guys that were really nice people when they were sober, but they could get really violent when they would be drunk. And I had one friend of mine who was kicked out of every clinic in Baltimore. And he was so violent when he was drunk, he just couldn't control himself, but he was really a sweet guy. And he and I worked to try to get him into programs. Back then, all we had was the antabuse, so that would make him sick when he drank. But he was craving alcohol so bad, he drank while he was taking the antabuse and would just get sick and deal with it. He put himself through rehab over and over again. He was an AA, faithful member of AA, but really nothing worked. And he was one day came to my clinic drunk, and I had to see him out in the street because he had been barred from the clinic. And there in the middle of Light Street in downtown Baltimore, he got down on his knees, grabbed my hands in the street and said, "Doc, put me somewhere where I can't drink. Help me, Doc." And boy, I tell you, that was really kind of a turning point in my career, because I felt like something needed to be done for folks like him. And when I had the opportunity to work at the NIH, I took it. And I worked in a lot of the areas where I was assigned as a young research doctor. We were studying new medications for alcoholism. I did research with the camprosate, a little bit with naltrexone, and trying to understand how alcohol affects the brain. But what I was really interested in was the nutrition, because it always seemed to me that the fellows that I met on the street who were homeless, they were really suffering from poor nutrition. All they had was junk food and whatever they could get in that area, which was really considered a food desert. The brain is really dependent on good nutrition. And when I was at NIH, I was fortunate enough to be able to study omega-3 fatty acids, and I was asked to do develop a ligand, what they call a way to measure the uptake of an omega-3 fatty acid, DHA. And this is my 5 minutes of fame. That's a magazine cover from the Journal of Lipid Research, where we were able to take pictures of the human brain uptake of DHA, this omega-3 fatty acid. And what we learned was that when people are recovering from alcohol, their brains suck up more of this omega-3 fat, and their brains need it. Their recovering brain really needs these nutrients. And of course, before I was doing this kind of research, physicians and researchers before me had recognized that B vitamins and all sorts of minerals were critically low in alcoholic patients. And they had, sometimes they report success in treating people with alcoholism with just B vitamins. And I knew about this, and I was fascinated by it. And I've been combining what I know about medications with nutrition in my private practice. And what I've found is that everything that's in science about nutrition matters. And the things that we know about medications that reduce craving for alcohol really help people. So what I want to talk briefly to you today is about two things. One is how you can sort of clear the mind with nutrition, because if you can't think straight, your brain's kind of foggy or you're not on point, it's going to be really hard to resist the temptation to drink too much or to be aware that you need to take a medication. And I'm not going to go into that's too much, but then I'll talk about medications, the many medications that we have available that we use to stop the craving. So the nutrition part, I just give a shout out for eating lots of fish. Traditionally, fish has been considered brain food. And if you haven't eaten fish, I recommend that you take omega-3 fatty acid supplements. Sometimes a high dose is really critical. It makes a big difference. B vitamins are really important if you've been drinking heavy, as is zinc, magnesium, zinc, also calcium. There's a study done a couple of years ago showing the calcium in the antacid tablets, calcium carbonate, will reduce craving and help people stay off alcohol, stay abstinent. It's remarkable. Sometimes these nutrients really make a difference. Sometimes people have a genetic defect in a certain enzyme, which makes a particular vitamin more important for them. And so some people need this vitamin, some people need that mineral, and some people respond to the omega-3 fatty acids. And it all depends on what someone's diet's been and where they are in their alcoholism deterioration of their brain. Because as you all have probably heard, when you drink heavy for a long period of time, your brain loses brain cells, and that causes brain atrophy or shrinkage. And when your brain's kind of shrunken and it's not as big as it used to be, it's only logical that you can't think straight. You can't pay attention to what the doctor tells you or what the people in the Alcoholics Anonymous meeting rooms tell you. If your brain's shrunken, maybe you're not going to have as much insight into the problems that alcohol is causing in your brain and in your body and your life. And so by restoring your brain with good nutrition and also stopping alcohol, you'll be much better able to do what you need to do to help yourself. So the part that we want to talk about today, though, is the medication. So the medications that we use are really amazing. Back 20 years ago, when I met my friend on the street in Baltimore, all we had was this medicine called Antabuse, which would make people sick when they drank after taking it. And that would help some people, particularly those who are really afraid of getting sick. So if you were that kind of person, probably worked for you really well, but I don't use that anymore. And I find that Naltrexone works great because of people like Katie and C3 Foundation. Everybody kind of knows about Naltrexone, but there are other medications as well, and they work great. Some of them may work better for you than Naltrexone does. So that's the ones we want to talk about today.
Yeah, that's great. And so, thank you for sharing a bit about that. I wanted to just quickly go back before we jump into the medications and ask about the nutrition, because I understand in your research and just logically, like you're saying, if someone's drinking heavily and they're not getting proper nutrition, of course, their brain is going to be impacted, the health of their brain, and it's going to impact everything. So is it safe to assume for someone, if they've been drinking heavily for 10, 20, 30 years, and their diet's been okay, but not great, they haven't been super mindful with eating a lot of fish or taking a lot of B vitamins or things like that, is it safe to assume that they are depleted of these key nutrients, and that would just be a great best practice for most people to perhaps implement, omega-3 fish oils and B vitamins and things like that?
That's absolutely right, Katie. And if you look at countries around the world, those that have really good diets, a Mediterranean diet with lots of fish and antioxidants, they don't have quite so much problems with the overwhelming alcohol use disorder that would be happening in other places that might not have such a good diet. And we know that if you drink more than about a glass and a half of alcohol a day, your brain starts to get smaller, particularly the white matter. But it's just science. And we know that the more you drink over that limit, the more you lose brain. And we don't know for sure that adding these nutrients will improve your brain, but it's kind of logical, and it certainly doesn't hurt. And I certainly have seen many people who recover from their craving for alcohol by just the omega-3 fatty acids, for instance. So I think it's very important to consider having really good nutrition if you're going to drink. It really is.
Yeah, that's really helpful. I know since knowing you the past couple of years, I've started taking the omega-3 fish oils, and I started with the one that didn't have like a flavoring in it, and I was like, oh, I never wanted to take it. But now I got one that has like a lemon flavor and it doesn't even taste like fish. So I'm like, this is great. It works real well. So yeah, I appreciate you sharing about that. Is there anything else you want to say about nutrition before we jump into the different medications?
Well, just that if you have lots of these good nutritional things, you may never need to see a doctor like me for medication. It really is really helpful. And of course, it has benefits for all kinds of your health problems that might exist too. Prevents Alzheimer's, depression. Part of the thing that's really fascinating about our brain is that we have just found out that a lot of these mental illnesses are similar in that they have an inflammation in the brain. It's measured when you look at the cerebral spinal fluid and you see what's called cytokines, these inflammatory markers. And depression and suicide and violence and alcoholism, PTSD, all these illnesses have the same signs in their in your brain, and that's why they're probably alike, and that's caused by lousy diet, by the overgrowth and the gram-negative bacteria in your gut, and you have a messed up microbiome that gets into your liver, causes liver inflammation. Liver inflammation spreads this inflammatory signal to your brain, and your brain has this inflammatory state, which then is relieved a little bit by drinking. So you drink and you feel a bit better, less inflammation symptoms, which kind of make you feel crappy. And then the cycle continues, because the more alcohol you have, the worse your microbiome is, and the more endotoxin, and the more debris from the dead bacteria get in your bloodstream and so forth. But a good nutrition, good diet can oftentimes correct that. Even things like gluten can sometimes affect people. Some toxins or processed food issues can make the lining of the gut more permeable or leaky. And so you get what people call a leaky gut, which makes it so that the endotoxin or the dead gram-negative bacteria byproducts get into the liver, cause liver inflammation, eventually cirrhosis. And then, but also it could get into the brain and cause this inflammatory state in the brain, and you get depressed, anxious, crave alcohol. And there's good science to show that this is what happens. And if you stop, it gets better. And if you improve your diet, it probably gets better too.
Yeah. So, like, say someone's watching this and maybe they haven't been super focused on their diet, like where would be a good place for someone to start? I know when people come to your practice, you send them, I think, something called 10 good rules. And so I just wonder if if someone's like, oh my gosh, like, how do I even start with this? Like, what would you say is like a good place for people to start
All right. So
improving
the
their diet?
first thing to do is stop drinking high fructose corn syrup drinks. First thing, because it's easy to quit the coffee. Coffee is great for you because it helps have a better gut function. Second is I take a bunch of fish oil, and I don't push any particular brand. Some taste better than others, but I will warn folks that there is counterfeit fish oil. So if it's too inexpensive or from some off brand, looks really great for deal, I spent a lot of money on what I realize now is probably fake fish oil or cod liver oil. So be careful about that. But I would do that as number two. I would just take a multiple vitamin. B vitamins would be great to take. I would recommend that people take minerals, calcium, zinc, magnesium while you're drinking. All that stuff is being depleted. So take it. And there's also a thing about some people have a genetic defect that makes it so that they can't use the folate, the type of folate that's in most vitamins. It's called folic acid. They put it to fortify bread and so forth. But if you have the wrong enzyme, or it's not quite the greatest enzyme, you have a need for a more bioavailable type of folate, a methylated folate. So that's kind of important for some people. It's really fascinating. Some people respond to B12. Some people respond to some of these forms of folate. And anyway, that's sort of, there's sort of a lot to it. But that's first I start with no high fructose corn syrup drinks. Then I eat fish, and then eat the best diet you can. Just have the least food additives. Organic food's probably better. I hate to say it, but the more money you spend on good food is probably better. So
Yeah, like whole foods, organic
yeah,
foods,
yeah,
healthy fats, fish, things like that.
right, right. Coconut oil is great if you like oils. Olive oil is great. Mediterranean diets. pretty good.
Okay. Yeah, I remember when we were talking a little while ago, you told me that coffee was good for you because, there's so many studies like back and forth, and I just trust your expertise since you've been in this field for so long. I'm like, okay, great. I can still have my coffee then. Okay, Dr. Umhau, I want to ask you now, like, we'll transition from the nutrition into the medication. So, what I have appreciated, I've learned so much from you, not only about naltrexone and how it works to help people with alcohol use disorder, but also other medications that people can use instead of, or perhaps in addition to naltrexone. So, the first one I wanted to ask you about is ondansetron. And I know you use this a lot in your practice. So, I'm curious, what is ondansetron? Who are the types of people you use it with? And what can people expect as a result if they are considering ondansetron for treatment of alcohol use disorder?
Well, great question. Ondansetron is oftentimes known as Zofran, which is the trade name. And Zofran is given all the time for people with nausea. If you go to the emergency room and you have vomiting, they give you 8 milligrams of Zofran. Well, it turns out that they found out that laboratory animals will stop drinking alcohol if they're given a little bit of Zofran, but it's not a high dose, it's a small dose. And over the last 10, 20 years, researchers have found that when people are given low dose or even microdose ondansetron, they don't drink as much, which is really kind of a neat discovery because ondansetron is a serotonin drug. It has very little side effects when given at the regular dose of 8 milligrams or 4 milligrams. But when we use zero point 0.2 milligrams, that's really a tiny dose, 20th of the regular dose. So we expect less side effects as doctors. And probably the main side effect I've seen is headaches. There's theoretical side effects, of course, related to serotonin effects. But the idea that you can give a tiny dose of a medication and get a reduction in alcohol consumption is great. It works great with other medications. You can mix it with naltrexone, and it's inexpensive. Dr. Harris, Jeff Harris, who's recently passed away, he said, well, just use the liquid formulation. You don't have to get it compounded special at this low dose, just use a few drops. And so it's about 5 or 10 drops of ondansetron is the dose for most people. And we don't really know exactly how any particular dose is going to work for any particular person, but we do know that the ondansetron is really effective sometimes. And it's effective for people with a certain genetics. It turns out that there is a particular gene that's different in a large number of the people that like drinking. And so if someone has a habit of drinking a lot before age like 25, they probably have this gene. Or if they have a family history of drinking, probably have this gene. And they're going to respond to ondansetron. If they don't have that gene, ondansetron is not going to work, might make them feel kind of woozy, and so they don't use it, and that's fine. But there's no real good way to test it. One day there'll be a drug that you can get your insurance company to pay for, and your doctor will know to prescribe it using ondansetron combined with a genetic test, and that's in development. Maybe it'll come out, and we'll be able to know for sure that there's a certain gene that allows people to benefit from this drug. But in the meantime, we just use it for people that seem like they have a positive family history and early onset alcohol, and it works really remarkably well. It's safe because it's such a tiny dose. And again, it's FDA approved for nausea, so physicians can prescribe it.
So I have a question then. If someone's on naltrexone right now, say following the Sinclair method, and maybe they've seen some progress, but they feel like they're perhaps plateaued or things like that, and maybe they're considering ondansetron, like how would you work with someone? How would you know if someone is a good candidate for ondansetron?
Well, I ask them, did you have problems with alcohol before your age 25? And do you have a strong family history? And if they say yes to either one of those, it's likely that it would work. The other kind of interesting factoid is that if someone has tried some of the SSRIs, antidepressants, and those SSRIs kind of make them feel anxious and they don't like them, those people respond to ondansetron. It's sort of interesting like that. So
That's interesting.
yeah, something that has come out in the research. So so those are some of the ways that we kind of pick who might benefit the most from ondansetron, but because it's inexpensive, I just recommend it. Oftentimes with naltrexone, we'll add it to naltrexone, use both together. Um,
Okay. Yeah, and I know obviously you're only licensed to treat people in certain states here in the United States. And so if someone's not in one of the states that you treat, what would you advise for them if they want to go talk to their doctor about ondansetron? Like, how should they approach their doctor?
Well, because ondansetron is used so often for nausea, most doctors are very comfortable with it. They know it's fairly safe. And you could take one of the scientific papers or one of the journal articles that is available about ondansetron and show it to your doc and say, hey, I want to try this. Would you write me a pediatric dose? And just see if the doctor would do that, because it's safe. Doctors oftentimes would be more willing to try something if they're familiar with the drug and they know it's kind of safe anyway. They can just tell the doctor they're nauseous and want to try it or something. Some
Okay.
people say that it helps the nausea, the company Naltrexone, but I don't know that to be true. That's what they say.
Oh, interesting. Because, yeah, some people do feel nauseous on naltrexone. So
Yeah.
that's interesting. Okay.
And some people respond to different doses, and it's some people have responded to a higher doses than others. So it's not really known how all that will work out one day, but we do have a lot of research to show that it works.
Okay. And just to clarify one thing I wanted to ask about ondansetron, are people supposed to start it while they're still drinking, or does it help with people who want to stay alcohol free, or both?
Both.
Both. Okay. Okay,
And
great. Any oh,
like the naltrexone, it's important to remember the way that the drug works in your bloodstream. So when you take naltrexone an hour and a half later, it's the maximum effect. So that's when you want to take a drink, or that's the ideal time to drink if you're going to drink. So the same thing works for ondansetron. It's about an hour and a half after you take the dose is when it's probably working the most. So you can also do it as the research has been done, which is to take it twice a day. So you take first thing in the morning and in the evening. But I always recommend folks to take the medicine, whatever medicine it is for craving, to take it an hour or two before they're likely to drink, because that way the blood level of the drug will be able to block the craving. And ondansetron has been really remarkable. A number of people that are taking naltrexone, they just kind of stuck. Naltrexone works fine, but they don't feel like they're reaching their goals of just not thinking about alcohol anymore. Well, ondansetron has this other effect too. On some people, it just takes away their depression and anxiety as well as the desire to drink. So I have a number of patients who felt like it was the most amazing kind of antidepressant they'd ever had. Just did like 5 drops of this stuff twice a day. And so they're very happy about it. And that may be part of the reason why it does help people just not to drink. They just don't feel like drinking that much.
interesting. So fascinating.
Yeah,
Okay, so are you ready to move on? I wanted to ask you about
sure.
topiramate.
So Topiramate is also called Topamax, and Topiramate's been around for a long time, even longer than ondansetron. Topiramate's been around as a seizure medicine, but it was also used for migraine headaches and for certain kinds of pain. That means it's a safe medicine. It's been around for a long time, the doctors kind of know what it's about. It can cause some ill effects, namely it can cause kidney stones, and it can also cause kind of glaucoma. So you have eye pain, that's something to watch out for. Also, if you're if you're pregnant, it's possible that the topiramate could cause the developing baby to get a cleft palate. So it really strongly advised against using topiramate if you're trying to get pregnant. The thing about topiramate is it does have side effects. They're not deadly, but they're certainly a nuisance, and it affects the cognitive slowing, makes people speak slower sometimes. Oftentimes they get over that, but there's tingling and that kind of thing. But even though I'm talking about the side effects first, the most important thing to know about Topamax, if it works for you for alcoholism, it really cuts down your desire to drink. It just really works very powerfully sometimes. Some researchers think it works in a more robust or stronger way than naltrexone does, because it really does stop craving and reduces consumption really remarkably. So you can take it with drinking. It works without drinking, with drinking, and it's really a great one to use for many people who don't respond to naltrexone. Is probably my second line choice, because it's there's a lot of research about it, and people have been using it for a long time.
Wonderful. Do you ever combine it with naltrexone?
Yep, you can
You do?
combine it with naltrexone, and you can combine it with ondansetron too. So
Okay. And that's another one too, like if someone, if they can't come see you because you're not in a state they serve, they could talk to their doctor about this medicine, bringing in scientific journal and things like that.
right, there's a lot more written about Topiramate for alcoholism than there is ondansetron. So this should be fairly easy. If your doctor's interested in helping you, they'll be willing to prescribe this probably. And I use a small dose. Oftentimes the research studies using Topiramate say that you take 100 milligrams 3 times a day. Well, I've gotten success using 25 milligrams or 50 milligrams once a day, right before happy hour. So you really have to think about the blood levels of these medications, because it really matters. See, we're not treating the person. It's not an antibiotic treating germs throughout the body. We're trying to block the symptom of alcoholism. And once the symptom goes away, the disease goes away.
Yeah. Yeah, actually, I'm just now recalling you sent me, because I was asking you about this medication and you sent me some scientific journals, and I remember they were varied on the dose. And I remember asking you, like, well, so what dose do people take? It's not as standard as there is with naltrexone, where it's the 50 milligram tablet. So that's
Right,
interesting that you've seen success with the lower doses.
right.
Okay. What about the next one, Baclofen? Did you want to talk about
Yeah,
how you use
Baclofen. Oh,
Baclofen?
it's a fascinating story about Baclofen. There was a French physician named Oliver Edmondson who was very prominent in France, and he came to America, was a professor at a university hospital, and he developed really severe alcoholism. I mean, he did everything he knew. He tried it. Nothing worked. The naltrexone, the camprosate didn't work, and AA didn't work. He finally had to resign his practice because he couldn't stop drinking, and it was just horrific. But he'd read a study somewhere that this muscle relaxant named Baclofen would reduce the alcohol consumption in little animals, mice. And so he said, well, I'll try it. Can't hurt. I'm going to die from alcoholism. I'll try it. And he did. And since there was no way to know the dose, he just gradually increased the dose of this medication. And it has a lot of little side effects, numbness, tingling, um, weird kind of side effects, very troublesome side effects, some depression, some anxiety, all kinds of weird little side effects. But he kept with it. He kept increasing the dose. He'd back off on the dose for a couple of weeks and then start gradually increasing again until after about 6 months, he reached a point where he was indifferent to alcohol. He just didn't care anymore. And he stated that dose, and he recovered, and he wrote a book about it. And here's the book. So the book was in French, and I didn't read the French version, but the book was a bestseller in France, and I think the number is about 300,000 French folks did Baclofen therapy for themselves to stop drinking. And so based on just this story, they've done a lot of research about it. And the research is kind of mixed, actually. There's some people that benefit, some people don't. But it's one of the medications that we use. Some doctors will not use these high doses that Dr. Edmondson used on himself that are sometimes effective, but they'll use a smaller dose. But if it works, it works. Dr. Edmondson had a really neat idea. He said that alcoholism is unique in that of all the diseases, it's the only disease that he can think of where the symptom is the disease. So once you stop craving alcohol, the disease goes away, but that's the symptom. And so it's really, you want to get rid of that symptom. So when I treat patients, I want that symptom of craving to go away. That's bad. So if you're craving alcohol, take a medicine to make the craving go away, or have fun and go play sports, or enjoy an outdoor activity so that you're not craving. Craving is a thought process. And just like when Pavlov's dog was thinking about the steak, and he would salivate, the dog would salivate, then they rang a bell, and the dog would salivate with the meat and the bell. And then just after a while, just the bell would ring and the dog would salivate. All the neurochemicals, all the brain chemistry that was associated with eating was actually happening with the bell. So when we think about drinking, all the same neurochemistry is happening as if we were actually drinking alcohol. Well, some of that's endorphins. Some of those are other pleasure chemicals. And if we can block the craving, then we block that pathway. But if we don't block that pathway, if you just imagine drinking, we're activating that same pathway as if we were drinking. So when we're talking to people about alcohol-free days, and they just want to white knuckle it, and they're not going to drink, if they're craving alcohol and they don't take a pill, what's going on is they're thinking about alcohol. They're releasing endorphins in their brain. Those endorphins are reinforcing the same cycle again. So although some people don't think it's right, I think it's important to treat people with craving, no matter, whatever medication they're on. And once you get rid of the craving, eventually your body will extinguish the desire to drink. So that's sort of way Edmondson thought about it. I think he's correct. I think that the use of baclofen is just another way that people can overcome the craving and eventually get free of alcoholism.
Yeah, that's great information. So with baclofen, is that taken with abstinence or while drinking or both?
Both.
Both? Okay.
It's been shown that it's safe for people who have severe liver problems too. So
Oh, okay. Okay, that's great
really
to know.
helpful sometimes. Yeah.
Okay. Okay, so one or two more I wanted to ask you about. The next one is a camprosate. You didn't talk about that one yet, did you?
No, I didn't. I did research on a camprosate. Camprosate's neat because it's FDA approved. This is big pills. You take two of them 3 times a day, and it really does work for a lot of people. Some studies show that it works better than naltrexone, but again, it's going to be what works better for you. So that's the issue. And the camprosate is shown to be working best for people that have stopped drinking entirely. So if you're off alcohol and you want to stay abstinent, it's a great medicine for you. It's an amino acid, and it's combined with calcium, and it's fairly safe. Sometimes people get leg swelling or upset stomach, but I used it quite a bit in my research, and it doesn't really cause too much problem. Sometimes people feel nauseous, but that's not a big deal. One thing that's fascinating about camprosate is that some of the guys that I was working with at NIH, Wolfgang Sommer, he thought that perhaps it was not the amino acid part of the camprosate, but maybe it's the calcium part, because it's a lot of calcium combined with the amino acid to make it work. And so he was the one that did the study with calcium carbonate, which is Tums, right? So a couple of Tums twice a day was used in a study in Germany versus placebo, and it reduced people's relapse to heavy drinking. And I think it's pretty cool. So, but anyway, camprosate's a drug that your physician should be comfortable prescribing. It's FDA approved for alcoholism. You take it 3 times a day. You start off with one pill and then increase it to 2. But it really works. I had one fellow that came to see me, and he just stopped drinking. This is the saddest story. So he came to see me, and he was breaking up with his wife and is deciding to get custody of their little children. And he says, I just don't want to drink anymore. And so I said, okay, well, try camprosate. I was thinking he would need to take naltrexone one day, but he didn't. He just stopped drinking. He took that camprosate. And after a few months, he was fine. He said, doc, this is great. I haven't needed to drink. I haven't been without alcohol for 3 months and, years. This is great. Thank you so much. And then after 6 months, he confided, he says, doc, if I'd known about medicines that could reduce the craving for alcohol 14 months ago, I wouldn't be divorced today. And I just think, whoa, we've got work to do to spread the word about these medications, So anyway,
Yeah.
that's one thing about a camprosate. It really can help people.
That's wonderful. And yeah, to know the people who are just ready to quit drinking today and they don't want to go through the process of the Sinclair method or harm reduction, it's an incredible option.
Yeah.
So one more I wanted to ask you about, which I'm not familiar with, but I know you have it on your website, prazosin. Am I saying that correctly?
Prazosin, it's called mini press. It's a blood pressure medicine. So the story about this blood pressure medicine is that it's been around for a long time. It was an old medicine when I was a medical student, and it was used for lowering blood pressure, but it didn't work that great. So people didn't use it very much. The issue was people would stand up too quick and they would faint, and that doesn't work. Doesn't go too well, but it did lower blood pressure, and it also helped people with prostate problems. Men with prostate problems would take this medicine. It'd help them. And they were doing a study on this at the VA, and they noticed that some of the guys wouldn't have PTSD symptoms. They would sleep through the night. And so they did a study, and the study showed, in fact, it really does help a lot of men with post-traumatic stress problems. And so then they did a study looking at post-traumatic stress using prazosin. And in this study, a bunch of the guys said, "Oh, by the way, doc, I used to be a heavy drinker, but I quit drinking on prazosin. I don't need to drink anymore." And so then they did a study on just people with alcoholism, and they found that it worked for that too. So it's kind of a neat drug because it's very safe. And even though it causes people to faint sometimes, it's been around forever, so there's no surprises. It has some side effects that people have to watch out for, but it's inexpensive. It's hard to take because you have to take it 3 times a day, and you build up your dose slowly. The first dose at night because you want it to affect you while you're asleep, so you don't have fainting while you're asleep, doesn't bother you so much. So, but the nice thing about it is that it's available just about everywhere. And if your doctor is going to prescribe a blood pressure medicine and you have alcohol problems, say, "Doc, why don't you try this prazosin stuff? I've heard it's really good for me." And maybe they'll write the prescription for prazosin and it might help. So
That's great. And so one thing that just came to mind, I know it's a common question for people, is some of these medicines you mentioned are prescribed off-label for treatment of alcohol use disorder. Can any doctor prescribe off-label?
absolutely. There's a misconception that somehow being off label is bad, but that's the way physicians prescribe medications for, hundreds of years here in America. Everything's off label. The labels are sort of advertising that the FDA allows because a company has proven that the medication works for that purpose. But the medication it has effects on the body, and those effects can be useful for many diseases. Aspirin for heart attacks is off label. Everybody uses aspirin for heart attacks, prevent so many deaths. But most of the common medicines that we think of are used off label.
That's a good point about the aspirin. I didn't think about that. Okay, that's great. Are there any other medications you want to talk about, or anything else you wanted to say about medications for alcohol use disorder?
Well, I think it's just important to realize that there's a lot of things coming down the pike. One day there'll be a completely different set of medications than the ones I'm talking about now. Fortunately, we're learning a lot about brain science, and there's electrical therapy that might be helpful one day. There's a lot of interest in people using, for instance, even psilocybin or ketamine, or back 50 years ago, they were using LSD. Some of these probably have some significant side effects and downsides, but there are possibilities for completely new ways of treating alcoholism that we just haven't even conceived of yet. I'm very optimistic that something like a magnet therapy could really help, reduce the craving. But kind of in the final analysis, I can help someone think clearly. I can help them with medication to take away the craving. But if somebody gets plastered and just forget and zone out, I can't stop that. That's the more important part of the long-term, what we think of as traditional recovery, where you work on your personality, you work on your character, you work on having meaningful life and feeling really good about yourself in the deepest part. And that will really help you when things get really rough. And that's what I always want to encourage everybody who's listening to this. It's not just a pill. It's not just nutrition. It's the whole person that's important.
Yeah, I think that's an important point you bring up, because even with naltrexone, seeing people say, "Oh, I don't really want to drink anymore, but here I am having 2 bottles of wine anyway. Like, why is that?" And I think that speaks so clearly to what you're saying, is the medication is really powerful, but there's this other component of lifestyle, behavior, habit change, things like that.
Because the saddest thing is when somebody is completely free of alcohol craving and they're able to live life for a while, and then they just decide to drink more and go back to it, and they waste their lives that way, and that's not good. Meaning in life and finding a purpose is really important.
Yeah, it absolutely is. And for a lot of us, drinking has been that purpose. And it takes a while to kind of uncover what do I like to enjoy to
Yeah,
do outside of
yeah,
that? And who am I without, being drunk every night? That was the
yeah,
question I asked myself. So it's a beautiful process.
yes. There's a lot of
Oh,
hope for people.
yeah. Well, I want to thank you for taking time to chat with me and for, dedicating your life's work to helping people with alcohol addiction. It's amazing the impact you've been able to have. So, is there anything else you want to share before we wrap up?
Katie, guess thanks for your good work. I think that people should be aware that the Thrive community is really very helpful. A physician can do only so much. What's really important is the community to encourage one another to keep it up and keep the medications and to change their life in a real positive way. So it's a real holistic endeavor that you're promoting, Katie, and I really applaud you and Karen for doing that.
Thank you. I really appreciate that. Yeah, it's the program we wish, or at least I wish I would have had when I was on the medication. Could have saved some trouble. So thank you. And thank you for your support of it. All right. Well, thank you for the time and talking about nutrition and medication for alcohol use disorder. I'll talk to you later, Dr. Umhau.
Great. Thanks, Katie.
Bye.